My sister-in-law falsely claims I owe her $10,000. My husband steals from my account to give her the money, but he doesn't expect the cops waiting at home. I had always known that my relationship with my sister-in-law, Sarah, was tense. She was constantly belittling me and making passive-aggressive comments, and I had always tried my best to avoid confrontation with her. But things came to a head when Sarah accused me of owing her $10,000. I was taken aback, as I had never borrowed such a large amount of money from her. However, Sarah was insistent, and my husband seemed to believe her. I knew that Sarah had always been jealous of my relationship with her brother, and I couldn't help but wonder if this was some kind of twisted attempt to undermine our marriage, but I refused to let her get the best of me. I confronted Sarah calmly, explaining that I had never borrowed any money from her and that her accusations were baseless, but she refused to back down, insisting that I pay her back immediately. To make matters worse, my husband seemed to be taking Sarah's side. I couldn't understand why he would believe her over me, his own wife. It felt like he was choosing his sister over me, and it hurt deeply. My husband's behavior only grew more infuriating as time went on. He withdrew money from my bank account. After he withdrew the $10,000 from my account, he told me with a smirk that he was going into town with the money. I demanded that he not touch my ATM card and give me back the money he had taken, but he only laughed and walked out the door. I couldn't believe what was happening. My husband was stealing from me, and he didn't seem to care how much he was hurting me. I knew I had to stand up to him and put an end to this madness. I tried calling and texting him repeatedly, but he refused to answer. Finally, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I went to the bank and canceled my ATM card to prevent him from making any further withdrawals. When my husband finally came home, I confronted him about what he had done. I told him in no uncertain terms I would tolerate his behavior any longer. I demanded that he give me back the money he had taken and apologize for betraying my trust. At first, my husband tried to deny everything, but I could see the guilt written all over his face. He knew that he had messed up, and he knew that he had stolen from me. But I refused to let him off the hook that easily. I stood my ground, refusing to back down until my husband had made things right. But he didn't budge, not even an inch. He looked at me with a cold, steely glare and said that he was going to give the money to his sister no matter what. I felt a surge of anger inside me, but I tried to remain calm and reasonable. I told him that he couldn't just take my money and give it away to someone else, especially when the debt was false. But he just brushed me off, telling me that he didn't care what I thought and that his sister needed the money more than I did. I was seething with anger, and I couldn't believe that my husband was being so callous and selfish. It was like he didn't care about me at all, or our marriage for that matter. I fought him tooth and nail, trying to get him to see reason. I pleaded with him to give me back the money, but he just stood there with a smug look on his face, like he had all the power. I was enraged by his behavior. How could he treat me this way after all we had been through together? I felt hurt, betrayed, and humiliated all at once. But my husband just walked out again, leaving me alone and helpless. I felt like my entire world was falling apart, and I didn't know what to do. I took a deep breath and reached for my phone, feeling a knot forming in my stomach. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let my husband get away with what he had done. I dialed 911 and told them everything that had happened. The dispatcher listened patiently and assured me that they would send a unit to my house. I waited anxiously, my heart pounding in my chest, as I sat on the couch with my eyes glued to the door. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the sound of a police car pulling up outside. I jumped up and rushed to the door, my heart racing with anticipation. The two officers who came to the door were friendly but firm as they questioned me about what had happened. I told them everything, holding nothing back. They listened attentively and took notes as I spoke, assuring me that they would do everything in their power to help me. As we talked, I could feel my husband's presence growing closer, and my nerves started to get the best of me. I knew that this was going to be the moment of truth, the moment when everything would come to a head. Just as I had predicted, my husband walked in the door a few minutes later, a look of shock and disbelief on his face as he saw the police officers in our living room. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice rising with anger. The officers calmly explained the situation to him, telling him that they had received a call from his wife and that they were there to investigate a possible theft. My husband was taken aback, clearly not expecting this turn of events. He stammered and tried to make excuses, but the officers were firm and insistent. They demanded that he hand over the money he had taken from my account, and he begrudgingly told them that the money was with his sister. They were not going to let him off the hook that easily. The shock on his face was palpable, and I could tell he was not expecting this turn of events. I watched as he was handcuffed and led outside to the waiting police car. He looked back at me with a look of fear and desperation, but I could only stare at him with the steely gaze that he had given me before. I was done with him and his lies. It was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. My husband begged me not to go through with it, saying that he would make things right and pay me back every penny he had taken. But I knew that I couldn't trust him anymore. He had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The officers took my husband to his sister's house. Sarah was standing outside as the officers approached her house. I could see the fear in her eyes. She quickly ran inside and shut the door, trying to avoid the confrontation. But the cops weren't going to let her get away that easily. They knocked on the door and demanded that she come out. Sarah hesitated, but eventually opened the door and was immediately confronted by the officers. She looked at her brother, handcuffed, and began to cry. She tried to explain herself, saying that she was just trying to help her brother, but the officers were not interested in her excuses. They demanded that she hand over the money that had been taken from my account. Sarah hesitated for a moment, but eventually handed over the cash, tears streaming down her face. But things were about to get worse for her. The officers then informed her that she was under arrest for being an accomplice in a robbery. She was shocked and couldn't believe what was happening. She protested and begged for mercy, but it was no use. The officers were just doing their job, and she was going to have to face the consequences of her actions. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction as I watched her being taken away. She had caused me so much pain and suffering, and now it was her turn to face the music. I was relieved to have my money back, but my anger at my husband had not dissipated. I decided to press charges against both my husband and his sister. I wasn't going to let anyone get away with stealing from me. My husband pleaded with me not to go through with it, but I was not going to let them get away with what they had done. I was tired of being pushed around and taken advantage of. The police car drove away with Sarah and my husband in custody. The nightmare was finally over. Update 1. It has been a week since everything happened. As the sun rose the following day, I couldn't believe that my life had turned upside down in just a few hours. My husband and his sister were both in police custody, and I was left to deal with the aftermath of their actions. I knew I had to take action and fill out all the legal formalities as soon as possible, so that day itself, when they were arrested, I went to the police station and provided all the necessary documents, conversations, texts, bank records, to press charges against my husband and his sister. The next day, after I returned home from talking to my lawyer, I was startled to hear a knock at the door. I opened it to find my in-laws standing on my porch, looking distraught and worried. They begged me to drop the charges against their children, pleading with me to have mercy on them. I stood there unsure of what to say. Despite the tension between my sister-in-law and me, I never imagined that things would go this far, and now my in-laws were asking me to forgive and forget. I took a deep breath and calmly told them that what their children had done was wrong, and they had to face the consequences. I couldn't just let it slide and act like nothing had happened. But they continued to plead, insisting that their children were good people who had made a mistake. They promised that it would never happen again and that they would make it up to me. As much as I wanted to believe them, I knew deep down that this was not just a simple mistake. My husband had taken advantage of me and my trust, and his sister had been complicit in the whole thing. I tried to explain my point of view to my in-laws, but they wouldn't listen. They kept insisting that I forgive and forget, even offering me money to drop the charges. I was shocked and hurt by their actions. It felt like they were trying to buy my forgiveness, as if all of this could be resolved with a few dollars. But I stood firm, refusing to back down. I told them that I had already pressed charges, and that I wouldn't let their children get away with what they had done. Eventually, my in-laws left, disappointed and angry. Update 2. 8 months had passed since I had pressed charges against my husband and his sister for stealing from me. 2 weeks after the charges were filed, they were both released on bail. It was a painful reminder that justice is often slow and imperfect, but I refused to give up. In those 2 weeks, I had filed for divorce. I knew that there was no way I could continue my marriage with someone who had betrayed my trust in such a profound way. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. When my husband found out, he was furious. He begged me to reconsider, to give him another chance. But I was resolute. As the legal proceedings continued, I found myself struggling to hold on. The stress was overwhelming. But then I remembered how my husband and his sister had taken advantage of me, and my resolve was strengthened. Finally, the day came when the verdict was delivered. My husband and his sister were found guilty of theft and sentenced to jail time. They were also ordered to pay a significant fine as restitution for the money they had stolen from me. I had won the case, and justice had been served. But that wasn't all I had won, the divorce settlement too. I was happy with what I had been awarded. Now I am happy and moving on with my life. It hasn't been easy, but I learned to be strong and stand up for myself. I've also learned that sometimes the people we trust the most can hurt us the most, but I refuse to let that stop me from living my life to the fullest. I am grateful for the support of my friends and family. and I know that I will always have their love and encouragement to guide me. The in-laws are just enabling their children's criminal behavior. And did OP's husband seriously not see the divorce coming? He stole from her. And it wasn't just $1. NTA. Start fresh. NTA. You did the right thing by pressing charges. You need to protect your finances. Next story. My husband's brother is getting married overseas in 5 months, and we looked at the flight and lodging costs and just can't afford it. Heck, even if we had the money, we probably still wouldn't go, since it's a lot of money to spend for only a few days, and we have a mortgage with very high interest rates. The bride and groom themselves specified in their invitations that they'd understand if people can't go because it is quite an expense, since it's not all-inclusive, and the guests will literally have to pay for everything other than probably the wedding dinner. My parents-in-law are obviously going, and have already decided they'd also pay for flights and lodging for their other son and his children because they wouldn't be able to go otherwise. When we told my parents-in-law we weren't going, they offered to pay for us as well. Now, my mother-in-law and father-in-law are not exactly well off, and they're only a few years off retirement. They just have their little life savings, and based on the estimates, we'll probably already need to spend around $10,000 plus for just the 4 of them. My husband and I don't really want to add to their financial burden. We don't begrudge the other brother for getting his expenses all paid for since he does really struggle as a single dad, and he and his little son deserve a decent holiday. For me and my husband, though, we're just happy to celebrate the wedding on Zoom. Of course, our parents-in-law didn't take this news lightly and with constant message reminders in order to guilt-trip us into going, since it would really upset them if we don't. While talking to my mother-in-law the other day, we accidentally found out that the bride and groom called us ungrateful for refusing the offer, which really upset my husband. ITA, for not wanting to go to my brother-in-law's destination wedding and declining my mother-in-law and father-in-law's offer to pay for us? NTA. I personally think destination weddings are selfish and self-serving, a way to invite a ton of people and therefore put on a perceived obligation to send a gift, but not actually having to host them. It's not just the expense. Most people don't have unlimited paid time off or vacation time. When you decide to have a destination wedding, you are basically deciding how people will use their precious time off. Sorry, someone else's wedding doesn't sound like my idea of a vacation. It is not ungrateful to not want someone squandering their savings for your sake. If the bride and groom want you there so badly, they either need to move the wedding back stateside or pay your expenses themselves. It's the risk you take when you choose to have your wedding far away from your family. NTA. If the bride and groom want you there so bad they can offer to pay instead of making a couple of seniors living on a fixed income do it. What if your husband asked his brother to pay for just him to go? Would that be okay? Maybe the couple could afford to fly a single person out, and it is his brother. Just make sure they don't try to ask to get reimbursed by your in-laws. Next story, some background. Hannah, 26 female, and I, 25 female, have been best friends for 4 years. She's still studying full-time, whereas I have been working for the last few years. While we have had this friendship, it's become the norm for me to pay for both of us when we go out and do something together because she obviously doesn't have money, and she's not working at all. Let me just say that I have never minded this dynamic, and I always let her know that I'm okay with paying for her. Last night she texted me asking to make plans, and saying that she would love to see me and spend time with me, as it's been a few weeks since we have seen each other. She also lets me know she doesn't have any money, but would love to do something with me. She tells me that she doesn't have a Lyft home or money for Uber, so I told her I would pay for us at the bar, and I would gladly take her home afterwards. I wait around for about 2 hours for her to let me know she's ready, and we finally meet at the bar. Once we get inside, she casually lets me know she invited a guy she's been talking to. This was their first time meeting, and that he's sitting waiting at a table for her by himself. Of course, this confused me because why would she not mention this earlier? I didn't say anything to her until later in the evening, after I've been paying for everything and awkwardly sitting there third-wheeling between them. I told her I felt a bit used, and it seemed like she only invited me because she needed me to fund her date. We ended up getting into an argument, so I decided to leave and go home. I told her to find her own way home and walked out. This morning, I woke up to a text from one of our mutual friends telling me I'm in awe for leaving her at the bar knowing she didn't have a Lyft home. I do feel bad because maybe I should have taken her home instead of leaving her there. Edit for extra info. Her cousin dropped her off at the bar, and I drove in my own car. NTA. But let's be fair, did you really know she didn't have a ride home? Because she lied to you and manipulated you about everything else that evening, how are you to know she was telling the truth about the ride? Especially since usually people dependent on others don't fight with them if they don't have a backup plan? I mean, now it's obvious that she might have been telling the truth there, but It was reasonable to assume that she wasn't being truthful. By the way, I have been the person who relies on the generosity of others, and I want you to know that I always offered to spend time in free and/or cheap places first, and would do little things like baked goods to repay. Favors. One of my favorites is walks in the woods. If your friends are insisting on places where money needs to be spent, they aren't your friends. NTA. I've literally had similar situations like this with friends who I thought I was super close with and am no longer friends with. These people because I put up with BS like this for so long. I finally stopped dealing with friends like this, and my life is so much better now. Maybe not as social on the regular, but I still get out there, and I actually enjoy drinking and meeting new people. Maybe not best friends, but you'll see them around, and it's almost better.